Welcome to episode 151 of 10 Minute Record Reviews. This time I'm going to talk about Simon & Garfunkel's 1966 album, Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme. And what I have here is a 1970 US reissue of that record. This is the third album for this pair. Their first album, Wednesday Morning 3 a.m., which is pretty much pure, unadulterated Greenwich Village folk, flopped even though it was a pretty good album, and they ended up breaking up and Paul Simon heads off to the UK. While he's over there, Columbia Records puts out an overdubbed version of The Sounds of Silence, which goes to #1 as a single. So he hurries back to the US, and the two of them put out an album under the same name to capitalize. Now they're no longer obscure, they've got a bit of runway in front of them, and they've got the backing of their label. Simon struggles a bit to write music for this record, but even so, this ends up having some of their very best material. All that said, there are three kind of competing tendencies within Simon & Garfunkel's work. There are moments of real musical clarity and beauty. There are songs and moments which are kind of preachy and overly sincere, what I kind of call their undergraduate poetry moments. And there's a penchant for experimentation, which sometimes leads to gimmicky tracks. And all three of these tendencies are present on this record. As I mentioned, during Simon's absence in the UK, Columbia Records had taken the song The Sound of Silence, which had just been an acoustic folk tune, and had overdubbed an electric rock and roll band. And that song had gone to #1, so Simon had hurried back to New York. He reunites with Garfunkel, and in 3 weeks they've made the album The Sound of Silence, which goes to #21 on the charts. Columbia, encouraged by this, re-releases their first album, Wednesday Morning 3 a.m., which this time goes to #30. So now they've got two charting albums. They've got some breathing room as a consequence. They'd considered Sound of Silence as a record to be a real rush job, and in fairness, it really was. And so this time they wanted to take more time to do something which had more, in their view, artistic integrity. The label was willing to back them on this and said, fine, great, take a few months and make a good record. Easier said than done, however. They relied heavily as a duo on Paul Simon's songwriting. And in the wake of the success of those two records and of their hit single, they were touring, they were doing public appearances, and Simon found that he just could not get into the zone to write music. He was basically suffering writer's block in the first half of 1966 and commented that he really felt out of his element. While they did manage to pull together some new material, by and large the writer's block ends up winning out, and what they do is end up recycling a bunch of material which Simon had previously written while he was in the UK, some of which had already been released on his 1965 solo album, which he'd released while he was over there, the Paul Simon Songbook. This album ultimately did take them 4 months to record in the spring and summer of 1966, and in that time they also released 4 different singles to kind of keep their record label at bay. That was a good move because the bills for the studio time are adding up. Recall, of course, this was a duo who basically sang together with an acoustic guitar. And typically, if you're a Columbia Records, if it's a small group and you're thinking simple arrangement, it's going to be knocked out in a couple of days, you reckon. Well, it was going on and on and on, and it ended up costing something like $250,000 in today's money to make this album, which was kind of unheard of at the time. The assumptions about the simplicity of the songs and the arrangements are wrong because, of course, Columbia had given Simon a fair amount of creative control, and he was using that. So there was a lot more what you might call big P production in this record. Lots of studio effects, lots of overdubbing, and the fact they were using an 8-track recorder for a 2-piece outfit tells you a little bit about how complicated the recording sessions actually were. As I mentioned, some of the songs were new, but some of them were also re-recordings of songs which Simon had previously put out just a year before in his own solo album. And those include Patterns, Flowers Never Bend with the Rainfall, and A Simple Desultory Philippic. Scarborough Fair, the leadoff song, arguably the best song on the record, also has a little bit of recycling. There was a song in his solo record called The Side of the Hill, which had lyrics which got repurposed for this particular tune, although a different melody, which Garfunkel devised. Flowers Never Bend with the Rainfall was actually recorded in the Sounds of Silence sessions in December of '65, and it was included along with Homeward Bound from those sessions. So by hook or by crook, they cobbled together a record here, but it did pretty well because it went to #4 on Billboard. Side 1 starts with Scarborough Fair, Canticle, which is, I think, by any standard, a stunningly beautiful song. It is a traditional ballad, of course, but Garfunkel's singing, I think, elevates this to a whole other level. The ballad itself dates back to 17th century England, and Simon had been introduced to the song in 1965 while he was living there by a folk singer called Martin Carthy. And Carthy had put out his own eponymous record just a little bit before with an arrangement of this song on the record, and it's pretty much that arrangement which Simon uses here, which inevitably led the record companies to get into a bit of an argument about royalties. Columbia ends up paying up, although no money's ever go to Carthy because he'd signed away his rights to his company when he put his record out. That's followed by Patterns, which is a pretty good song, but it suffers a little bit lyrically from that undergraduate poetry issue, which I find a bit tough to get by. I much prefer Cloudy, the next song, which is a classic ethereal Simon and Garfunkel number. This is written apparently about a hitchhiker going from place to place. It's co-written by Simon and a guy called Bruce Woodley, who got royalty payments for this song, but never actually received any credit on the record because apparently it was important, quote unquote, for Simon to be credited as the author of the song, but this is a joint composition. The next song is Homeward Bound, which is a beautiful melancholy number. This song, like a number of songs from this particular era in Simon's life, relate to the relationship he had with a woman called Kathy Chitty while he was living in the UK in 1965. And when Sounds of Silence hit it big and he had a #1 record, she had actually followed him to the United States for a very brief period of time around this point, but was overwhelmed by the attention from fans, by the whole lifestyle. She told him, "I'm sorry, Paul, I don't want to go with you. I don't want to be part of that life," and quickly made her way back home, leaving Simon behind and pursuing a much more quiet and private life in England. She just wasn't that into him, I guess. In any event, his heart was broken by this, but he rushes off to fulfill his career. And she is name-checked in a variety of tunes. She's name-checked, of course, in Kathy's song. She's the Kathy of that title. She's on the cover of his solo LP. She is name-checked in America, and this song apparently is very much about her as well. The song itself is beautiful. It's a wonderful blending of the two talents here, and you can just tell sometimes when somebody is really pouring their heart into a number. The next song is A Big Bright Green Pleasure Machine, which is ostensibly a satirical piece about advertising and consumer culture and popular culture. I don't think the lyrics are as clever as Paul thinks they are. I find the musical backdrop, frankly, just kind of annoying sounding, and I just can't imagine anybody actually hurrying home to play this particular song of all songs. Very skippable. But all's forgiven on the last track of the first side, which is the 59th Street Bridge song, or Feelin' Groovy. This is 104 seconds of hippie escapism. It's incredibly catchy, it's incredibly hummable, and I have always loved this tune. Kind of an odd side note is the guy who wrote the theme song to the kids show in the late 60s, H.R. Pufnstuf, ended up having to pay Simon royalties for that particular melody. Side 2 starts with a dangling conversation, which is a sad little ballad about a relationship which is kind of falling apart. This song apparently divided the two because Garfunkel thought it was a pretentious lyric. I've always thought that it was kind of self-mocking, but if it's actually being sung seriously, then I think probably Art's right. But I like the song in any event. That's followed by Flowers Never Bend with a Rainfall, which of course have been brought forward from recording sessions from their previous album. This, I think, is Simon and Garfunkel, again, at their absolute best. It's airy, it's beautiful. The vocals are maybe a little bit undergraduate, but the quality of the vocal performance is such that really who cares? Now we're at the simple desultory philippic, which is full of what are now kind of dated pop cultural and current affairs references. But overall, it's an attempt by Paul Simon to take the piss out of Bob Dylan, which seems kind of ballsy, frankly, at this stage. And I don't really necessarily think he's on particularly firm ground in doing that because Dylan, frankly, is a much better lyricist. And if we forget about the parody and we just focus on the music, it's another annoying track. But, however, now we swing from the ridiculous to the sublime with For Emily, Wherever I May Find Her. To me, this is my favorite Simon and Garfunkel track of their whole catalog. Possibly Art Garfunkel's greatest ever performance, a really clever piece of songwriting, and the final lines never fail to give me goosebumps. The second last track in the album is a clever little tune called A Poem on the Underground Wall, which is about a graffiti writer. And I almost think this song is very effective at actually conveying the sense of kind of frantic nervousness of somebody writing something in a public space where they could get arrested would actually be exhibiting. And so, if anything, it's a bit of musical onomatopoeia. Really quite clever. The last song is 7 O'Clock News, intercut with Silent Night. And I just have to read the liner notes from Ralph J. Gleason, who says, "I will not tell you in advance what goes on here. My first hearing of it brought chills to my spine and tears to my eyes." Huh? To me, in retrospect, this is a bunch of pretty heavy-handed comment on current affairs made ironic by splicing it together with Silent Night. It's a third of 3 pretty dodgy attempts to be edgy on this record, and I just have to ask, if you're capable of writing For Emily or Homeward Bound, why would you even bother doing this? I mean, these are guys who elsewhere in this record are mocking Dylan, but at least when Dylan drew back and fired his arrows at a political target, they hit the mark. This album's a mixed bag. It's got 6 really beautiful numbers: Scarborough Fair, Cloudy, Homeward Bound, Feeling Groovy, Flowers Never Bend with the Rainfall, and For Emily. And some of those are truly breathtaking. There's another 3 songs that I would put in the pretty good category. Unfortunately, you also have 3 other pieces of social comment which lack much wit or subtlety and which have pretty annoying musical arrangements to go along with them. Simon and Garfunkel would hit the heights in their next 2 records. Here, there are still some elements of immaturity, although it's clear what's within their grasp. For me, this is 4 to 5 stars.